Speaking of pouring out your heart, Jordan, your new book, Avoidance Heartbreak, I've done it wrong. I knew I was going to do this. I practiced it so many times as well. Avoidance, Drugs, Heartbreak and Dogs, amazingly titled, hard to remember. It is a compulsively honest book.
Compulsively, yeah.
But it's an amazing read. It's
Thanks.
brutal and it's really raw. But I wonder for you how you got to that place of being able to write something like that and how you ended up feeling comfortable enough to put that out into the world.
Well, thank you for also using the word brutal. I've heard that a lot. And,
Sorry.
It freaks me out, but I think it is true because I think the process, the experiences, and then I wanted to create that kind of tense feeling because ultimately I went through a pretty epic heartbreak relative to my experience. And at the time, I didn't feel as though there was much on offer. I'm sure there are things I've missed that have been read in plays or whatever else, but I think especially through a heteronormative lens, my point of view, I hadn't seen a complete dissection of emotion in that way. So I thought it would best that I give it a go as a service to people like me. Not just specifically young men, but I guess most applicable to young men who perhaps lack guidance or understanding that the emotional world is one that we must have a balanced relationship with. It's not optional, it's necessary. And when I hear these two wonderful men speak about grief, it reminds me that, in fact, the opening quote is funny because when I was writing the book, in the proof, there was this little page at the start that said TDK, and I had to ask my editor, what the fuck does that mean? And they're like, you need to put a quote here. Well, you don't have to, but you could do. Yeah. And I thought, what quote can I do? And the only quote I could think of was once I was in an Uber, and the Uber driver, I can't remember the context of it, but he turned around to me and he said, there's only two things promised in life, change and death. And I was like, all right, keep your eyes on the road. No, but in all seriousness, he must have heard me on the phone or something like that, but he just had this profound statement and it's always stayed with me. And Stephen made the point that it's uncomfortable, having to have these conversations or people wanting these conversations, but grief, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, is, death is promised and it's heartbreaking and the world is fucking tragic and we suffer, but it connects all of us. And in the book, I don't mention Rizzle Kicks one time. I don't mention, I don't, is that funny? I've actually missed the context of that.
What's funny about that, bloke?
No, I mean it. I don't mention anything about my material existence because I didn't think it was important. I laid the context for it being that I had time and money. But ultimately, my experience of heartbreak was quite an epic grief that I didn't think separated me from anybody on the planet. Everybody is going to lose someone, lose something. And the more we understand about that experience, the more it will bring us together. That vulnerability breeds connection. It's the only time I've felt connected to a person as if they've opened up.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Don't you think it's weird how there's this thing that's going to happen to all of us and our immediate response to it because of the severity of not being able to comprehend nothingness, which is potentially, depending on your beliefs, what death is, instead of embracing life because you're gonna die, you just want to avoid the fact that you're gonna die and you do stupid shit that probably brings you potentially quite a lot closer to it. The fuck?
Yeah.
Let's avoid connection. Let's just practice deflection and avoidance because we're all gonna die. But wait, surely that should make us want to embrace this all the more, and the only way to really embrace this is by way of connection.
Yeah, and I also have to give a shout out to my current girlfriend who, the relationship I'm in now, I feel secure and safe. I feel love, and I feel connected to a person. And I didn't have the words. I didn't have an understanding that I could feel love like this. I didn't know I could feel something that is hard to explain. So I said to her throughout the whole process, which would have been tough for her because I was writing about a past relationship. I said, the only reason I can write this is because I feel so safe with you. And I want everyone to know, especially young men and men, that they can feel safe and loved and it's a lovely place to be in.
I mean, you mention young men there, and I think in all of your work, you've spoken about the importance of men speaking up and breaking down the stigma of men talking about mental health. And I wonder, over the past, you've all worked in this space for a really long time. What have you seen change when it comes to that conversation, or have you seen change?
Young men in love, is that what you said?
Yeah, so I suppose specifically how able men in your lives are to talk about their experiences, but also, when it comes to the way that we talk about mental health, we talk specifically about masculinity and emotions and anger and not needing to feel like you're holding up the world. And you mentioned like man up, all these kinds of things. Have you seen that dial move?
Yes, yeah, totally. I think it's a pendulum swinging, and there have been movements that have created, I mean, look, if we're talking about feminism, feminism's made incredible progress in terms of, I believe anyway, from what I've seen in terms of the books that have been written, the constant critique and development of the female experience. Most of my inspiration in terms of even analysing gender has come from bell hooks. So, and I think it's especially in a Western metropolitan society, delivered this self-confidence and ability to self-love or at least have access to a community that encourages the love of self. I think men have some way to go in terms of creating those communities within our space where we encourage connection to self and to others. But I definitely think there is more good going on in the world of men than perhaps we are led to believe. I look around me and see men who are brave and strong enough to break generational cycles all the time. The issue I find at the moment is that these wonderful men have no desire to be on YouTube and TikTok every fucking day of their lives. So unfortunately, the men that we're shown and fed that do have the time to be on YouTube and TikTok every fucking day of their lives are horrendous.
Literally the worst example of what it is to be a human, not just man.
Be a human. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to drag these unwilling men out of the comfort of their loving relationships and be like, start a fucking podcast, because everyone who is starting one is talking shite.
I think to add to that as well, I've seen a lot of changes, in particularly with the men in my life telling each other that they love each other. Yeah, that wouldn't happen. And even if it's done from emojis, I think emojis have saved more lives than we know, because do you know what I'm saying? You can just drop that love heart or the prayer hand symbol. That prayer hand symbol.
Where do you sit on the thumbs up emoji? Because Gen Z apparently hate it, but I'm quite into it.
What, the thumbs up? Yeah, I don't mind it. I don't mind it. The prayer hands is my go-to though. Whenever I've fucked up, I send the prayer hand. That saves me. That one saves me. But I think, I've seen the change. And maybe next year we should all have a conversation about grieving people that are still alive. Because I feel like I was crying the other day, and I said to my friend, and I think this is the problem when you're friends with writers, everyone's always got something to say. So you can't have a breakdown in peace, because they will drop some bars and it will make sense. So I was crying to my friend the other day, and I said, I'm crying like someone died, man. She's like, yeah, someone did. I said, who? She said, your old self. See what I'm saying? I was like, I'm there clicking and crying at the same time. Now I'm healed. But I think it's a big conversation in grieving people and things and a part of our life that didn't exist anymore. We often talk about grief and people that are not here. But I think we've seen a big shift with regards to, and if you asked me a few years ago, I would have said, we've seen a shift in certain communities, but not in all communities. But now I think we're seeing it more. So we just got to keep going.
I think there's something really interesting in what you said about grieving people that are still with us, because that can happen in so many ways. Be it the loss of a friendship, which can always come back round. You can always meet another incarnation of someone that you've fallen
I hope it
out
comes
with.
back.
But then also, I've got a 3.5-year-old son, and I was saying that very thing to someone the other day, like, I have to grieve my son over and over again because each incarnation with him brings new things, but it lets go of things. Like, he used to say downstairs instead of downstairs, and then one day he woke up and he just said downstairs, and I was like,
So sweet.
seriously, like, he's never going to say downstairs again. He still calls ketchup checkup, and obviously I hear those two words and get PTSD, but... one other thing, side note, just on the man up thing, I think man up's okay as long as it's used in the correct context, because I think we all need to man up and woman up at points. I think they can be very valid pieces of advice and necessary things to hear. I think the problem arises when a man, if we're saying man up, given it's a man in the body of the person who's saying man up, they don't have the sensitivity to address a person in front of them who might not need to hear that and may need to hear something other than that, because they don't have the toolbox or the toolkit to be in that situation and provide a useful piece of advice, or be able to offer them the space to be something other than what they deem to be a man, because that's all they know.
I'm interested that you say that, actually, because I was going to ask you, because Hussain, you've spoken about this as well, like the balance between vulnerability and resilience. And how resilience is a really big part of the conversation around mental health. And I don't know if, Jordan, you want to chime in on that as well, but do you know how do you balance those two things, the kind of difficulty of like asking for help, and also sometimes it's about you? Yeah,
you know, going back to Uncle Larry, yeah. So he's experienced life enough to know when I need him there for like a hug, but then he's also experienced life enough to know to tell me to grow up. And it's so powerful when he says that to me. I'll be like, Larry, this happened. He'll be like, yeah. And he'll wait for me to finish talking. Grow up! And I'm like, you know what? You're actually right. But I'll listen to you because you also hear me when I'm down.
Yeah.
And like, you know I can get through this one. So when I hear that grow up is said with so much compassion, I think certain people in your life have to qualify to talk to you like that. Yeah. They got to earn their badges before they can start coming in with
like
that.
They have to have lived enough life to qualify for that, and also just to have enough understanding of you. Because ultimately, I guess what they're saying when they say grow up or man up is find the strength within yourself to overcome this, but perhaps they don't have the vocabulary to say that. And some might say that's semantics, but it isn't for someone that's in the position of being on their knees crying in desperate need of something and doesn't feel like they have the strength. Just being told to get over it is not the easiest thing in the world.
I really, the more I learn about people developing relationships, you know, there's now new generations of boys and girls who have totally different perspectives on life, and we're battling the traumas of the older generations, etc. I just think about, ultimately, we have these hearts, and as I've got older, I can now feel when my heart is open and when it's closed. And I think often we're caught talking about the extremities of when those experiences go too far. I would never recommend somebody keep their heart closed for a long time, because it's isolating. And I think that's where we create some of the most more damaging behaviors will come from people who have been so traumatized or experienced such a significant heartbreak, perhaps at such a young age, that their heart is closed. And you can't connect to people like that. And so you're able to act in unempathetic ways. In the flip side, there are people who keep their heart too open. I really believe that too. That they allow everything in, and they're unable to cope because it's our responsibility to hold boundaries, you know. If someone to be boundaryless, they enter into spaces where they can be moved and swayed, and it becomes overwhelming. So every single human being, regardless of gender, I mean, I would even go as far as to call these different mechanisms masculinity and femininity, but that's more of a subjective conversation. But it's our responsibility to practice opening and closing our hearts as we engage with the world. And it sounds maybe a little bit airy because our concept of heart might be subjective, but it really is true. And I know the feeling. I know the feeling of where my heart is when I'm around certain people and when I'm not. You know, and the boundaries was a big lesson for me. You know, knowing when just to shut the door slightly. Sometimes you don't want to have that in your personal situation, you know. So everybody has responsibility to balance those two energies. And I think sometimes gender can be quite a reductive way of looking at that experience.